Everyone thinks the Appalachian Trail is about freedom, about connecting with nature, about finding yourself. And for a while, I believed that too. The crisp air, the endless green, the camaraderie of fellow hikers. It was intoxicating. I signed up for the ranger program straight out of college, eager to trade the concrete jungle for ancient forests. They put me on a section of the trail deep in the Great Smoky Mountains, a place where the mountains clawed at the sky and the valleys were perpetually shrouded in mist. It was beautiful, yes, but there was an ancient, unsettling silence to it, a feeling that something vast and unknowable lurked just beyond the veil of trees. My initial training was pretty standard. First aid, search and rescue protocols, trail maintenance, the usual. But then came the special briefing, delivered by an old-timer named Miller, a man whose eyes held the weary resignation of someone who had seen too much. He sat us down in a cramped, musty office, the air thick with the smell of old paper and something else, something metallic and faintly sweet, like forgotten blood. He laid out a laminated sheet of paper on the table. No, not a sheet, a list. "These," Miller said, his voice a low gravelly murmur, "are the rules, the real rules. They ain't in no manual, and you sure as hell won't find them on any trail map. You follow them, you might just make it out of here with your mind intact. You don't, well, you'll join the others." He didn't elaborate on who the others were. He didn't have to. The unspoken weight of missing persons reports hung in the air, a phantom chill that no amount of heat could dispel. I grabbed a pen, my hand trembling slightly, and started to write. Rule number 1. Never deviate from the marked trail, not even for a second. This was the first rule, hammered into us with an intensity that bordered on fanaticism. The trail, Miller emphasized, is a sanctuary. Everything else is theirs. At first, I thought he meant wildlife or dangerous terrain, but the way he said theirs, with a subtle shudder, made my blood run cold. One crisp autumn afternoon, a distress call came in. A young woman, solo hiker, sprained ankle. Easy enough. I geared up, my pack heavy with first aid supplies and a stretcher. I found her just a quarter mile off the marked path, huddled against a moss-covered boulder. She was pale, shivering, but coherent. As I bandaged her ankle, she kept glancing back into the woods, her eyes wide with a fear that had nothing to do with her injury. I heard something, she whispered, her voice barely audible. Like really close, like a whisper, but it wasn't words, more like a dry rustling sound. And then I saw it. Saw what? I asked, trying to keep my voice calm, professional. A branch, she stammered, pointing a trembling finger deeper into the woods, past the thick canopy. It was just a branch, lying on the ground, but it was moving, like it was trying to crawl away. And it wasn't wood, it was bone, like a human arm bone, but still with bark on it, and it was moving. I scoffed internally. Shock, pain, maybe a little dehydration. Classic hiker hallucination. I helped her up, got her on the stretcher, and we started back. But as we moved, I couldn't shake the image of her pointing finger. And then, just as we reached the trail, I heard it too. A faint, dry rustling, like something dragging itself through fallen leaves. But it was coming from within the trees, not from the ground. It was too soft to be wind, too deliberate to be an animal. I stopped, straining my ears. Nothing, but the hair on my arm stood on end. I pushed the image from my mind and hurried the injured hiker back to the ranger station. Later, I checked the spot where she'd been. There was no bone, no unusual movement, but for a long time, the memory of that rustling sound would keep me awake. Rule 2. Never camp alone and never leave your tent after sunset. This rule was less about avoiding danger and more about surviving the psychological toll. The mountains at night were a different beast. The familiar chirping of crickets was replaced by a profound, oppressive silence. Any sound became amplified, distorted. The snap of a twig, the hoot of an owl, even the rush of wind through the trees, they all took on a sinister edge. One night, a new ranger, fresh-faced and eager, decided to prove his mettle. He ignored the rule, setting up his solo camp deep in a remote valley. The next morning, his tent was found ripped open, as if by something immensely powerful. His pack was scattered, his supplies strewn everywhere, but there were no footprints, no struggle marks, just the inexplicable rending of fabric and the deep, unsettling silence of the forest. He was gone, disappeared without a trace, like so many others. I never forgot his disappearance. After that, I always made sure to camp with a partner, or at least within shouting distance of another group. But even then, sleep was a luxury. The nights were punctuated by strange sounds, not animal noises, not human, more like a soft rhythmic thumping, like a massive heart beating deep within the earth. And sometimes a low guttural humming that seemed to resonate in your very bones, a sound that felt both ancient and hungry. Once, on patrol with my partner Ben, we heard it. The humming. It started faint, a vibration in the soles of my boots, then grew, a deep, resonant drone that seemed to fill the entire valley. Ben, usually stoic, went pale. "What is that?" he whispered, his eyes darting around the darkening woods. "I don't know," I managed, my voice tight. We instinctively drew closer together, our flashlights cutting feeble beams through the growing gloom. The humming intensified, growing louder, more insistent, and then, slowly, a new sound joined it, a faint, high-pitched scratching, like something with too many claws dragging itself across rock. It was coming from above us, from the ridge line. We didn't wait. We moved fast, a desperate stumbling jog down the trail, the strange symphony of hum and scratch pursuing us like a phantom predator. We didn't stop until we reached the relative safety of the ranger station, our lungs burning, our hearts pounding against our ribs. We never spoke of it again, but the sound, it's etched into my memory. Rule number 3. If you find a cairn of unusual stones, leave it undisturbed. Cairns are common on hiking trails, piles of stones used as markers, but Miller's rule specified unusual stones. What made them unusual? He never explained. He just said, "They ain't for us. They're offerings." Or warnings, "Don't mess with them." I found one once, deep in a rarely traversed section of the trail. It wasn't the typical pile of grey river stones. These were black, smooth, almost obsidian-like, and meticulously stacked, perfectly balanced. They seemed to hum with an almost imperceptible energy and a faint, acrid smell, like burnt ozone, hung in the air around them. It was unlike anything I had ever seen in the wilderness. Curiosity, that fatal human flaw, gnawed at me. I stretched out a hand just to touch one. My fingers were almost there when a voice, clear as a bell but devoid of any human inflection, whispered directly into my ear, "Do not disturb." I yelped, jerking my hand back, stumbling backwards. I spun around, my heart hammering, but there was no one there. The forest was silent, save for the rustle of leaves in the breeze. But the voice, it was distinct, undeniable. It wasn't a trick of the wind or an echo. It was a direct command. I backed away slowly, my eyes fixed on the black cairn, feeling an intense, suffocating presence emanating from it. It felt like I was being watched, not by one pair of eyes, but by 1,000, all unseen, all malevolent. I never went back to that spot. Rule number 4. Never answer a call for help if you cannot see the caller. This rule always felt the most insidious. As a ranger, our primary duty was to help. To ignore a cry for help went against every instinct. But Miller was adamant. "The mountain plays tricks," he'd said, his voice grim. "It can mimic anything. A child crying, a woman screaming, your own mother's voice. But if you can't see him, you don't go. You just walk away." It was a cold, misty morning when I truly understood the terrifying logic behind this rule. I was on patrol, heading towards a popular overlook, when I heard it. A faint, almost imperceptible "help me" drifting through the fog. It sounded young, female, and utterly terrified. My training screamed at me to go. My gut, however, remembering Miller's words, screamed louder. I stopped, straining my ears. "Hello?" I called out, my voice raspy in the damp air. "Please," the voice whimpered, closer this time, just off to my left. "I'm hurt." I took a step towards the sound, then stopped. Something felt wrong. The voice, while clear, seemed flat, emotionless, despite the desperate words. It was like a recording played back in a desolate theatre. And then, another sound joined it. A soft, wet sloshing, like something heavy being dragged through mud. It was coming from the same direction as the voice. "Where are you?" I called out again, trying to gauge distance to pierce the swirling mist. "Here," the voice whispered, right beside me, so close I could feel a chill against my ear, despite the damp warmth of the air. I spun around, my heart leaping into my throat. Nothing, only the swirling mist, the ancient trees. But the wet, sloshing sound was louder now, and I could feel a faint vibration in the ground beneath my feet. And then I saw it. Just at the edge of my vision, through a momentary thinning of the fog, a dark, indistinct shape. It was tall, impossibly thin, and seemed to shimmer at the edges like heat rising from asphalt. And then it was gone, swallowed by the mist. I didn't run. I couldn't. My legs were like lead. I just stood there, breathing heavily, the phantom voice still echoing in my ears, the wet, sloshing sound fading into the deeper silence of the forest. I walked away, slowly at first, then faster, until I was almost running, not looking back, not daring to. I never heard that voice again, but I've heard whispers of other rangers, other hikers, who weren't so lucky. They followed the voice. They were never seen again. Rule number 5. Do not acknowledge anything that appears wrong. This was the vaguest, and perhaps the most terrifying, of Miller's rules. Wrong could be anything. A tree that wasn't quite a tree. A shadow that moved when there was no light source. A face in the undergrowth that wasn't there a moment ago. The rule was simple. If it looks wrong, if it makes your gut clench, pretend you don't see it. Do not react. Do not stare. Do not acknowledge its existence. I was on a solo patrol, deep in a particularly isolated section of the trail, when I encountered wrong. It was a patch of wildflowers, vibrant purples and yellows, nestled in a small clearing. Beautiful, but out of place. Too perfect. And then I noticed the stems. They weren't green. They were a sickly, pale white, almost translucent, and they seemed to pulsate faintly, as if with an internal light. And the flowers themselves, they had too many petals or too few, and their colors shifted subtly, almost imperceptibly when I blinked. My blood ran cold. This was it. This was wrong. Every instinct screamed at me to stop, to examine them, to figure out what they were. But I remembered Miller's rule. I kept walking, my eyes fixed straight ahead, my pace steady. I felt a prickling sensation on the back of my neck, a sense of intense scrutiny, as if something was watching me from the patch of flowers, its attention a palpable weight. I could almost hear a low, sibilant whisper, just at the edge of my hearing, urging me to look, to engage. I didn't. I just kept walking, my mind a blank slate, until the unnatural patch of vibrant, pulsating flowers was far behind me. Only then did I allow myself to breathe, a long, shuddering gasp. The air still felt thick, heavy with an unseen presence. And for days afterwards, a faint, sweet, cloying scent, like decaying flowers and something else indescribable, clung to my clothes. Rule number 6. Never pick up anything you find on the trail, especially if it looks man-made. Hikers often drop things. Water bottles, granola bar wrappers, even small pieces of equipment. Standard procedure was to pick it up, pack it out. But Miller was emphatic about this rule. Anything that ain't natural, he'd warned, leave it be, especially if it looks like it belonged to someone who's gone missing. A few months after I started, a search party went out for a missing hiker, a young woman, maybe early 20s, who was on a long-distance trek. Weeks passed, no sign. Then, about a mile from where she was last seen, I found it. A small, intricately carved wooden bird, perfectly preserved, lying right in the middle of the trail. It was clearly man-made, and it looked like something a hiker would carry for sentimental value. My hand reached for it automatically. It was a clear piece of evidence. But then Miller's words echoed in my mind. Anything that ain't natural, leave it be. The bird felt wrong. Too perfect, too clean, despite being out in the elements for weeks. It seemed to almost glow with a faint, internal light, and I felt a strange, inexplicable pull towards it, a desire to touch it, to possess it. I hesitated. Then, with a profound sense of unease, I stepped over it, leaving it where it lay. I reported its location, but by the time the search team arrived, it was gone. Vanished. Just like the hiker. I later learned that the young woman was known for her wood carving hobby. She had carried a small wooden bird, just like the one I found, with her everywhere. Coincidence? I don't think so. It felt like a trap, an invitation to something I didn't want to know. Rule number 7. If you see a light in the deep woods that doesn't move, do not approach it. This was the rule that finally broke me. The lights. They were common enough knowledge among the locals, whispered about in hushed tones around campfires, dismissed as swamp gas or optical illusions by rational minds. But I knew better. They were a soft, pulsating glow, deep within the ancient, untouched parts of the forest. Not the steady beam of a flashlight, nor the flickering orange of a distant fire. This was a diffused, ethereal luminescence, like captured starlight, moving with an impossible slowness, or sometimes not moving at all. One night, on patrol, I saw one. It was low to the ground, a pale, milky white light, nestled amongst the roots of an ancient oak, maybe 100 yards off the trail. It pulsed, softly, rhythmically, like a distant heartbeat. It was beautiful, mesmerizing, and utterly terrifying. Every fiber of my being wanted to investigate, to understand. But Miller's rule screamed in my head. I just watched it from the safety of the trail for what felt like hours. The air around it seemed to shimmer, and I could almost hear a faint, high-pitched humming, like the distant ringing of 1,000 tiny bells. And then I saw shapes within the light, not distinct figures, but shifting, swirling forms, like shadows dancing in smoke. And sometimes, just for a fleeting moment, I thought I saw faces, gaunt and twisted, their mouths open in silent screams. I backed away slowly, my eyes never leaving the pulsing light. The moment I turned my back, I felt an intense cold, a feeling of being watched by something ancient and malevolent. I fled, stumbled back to the ranger station, my heart a frantic drum against my ribs. I spent the rest of the night huddled in my bunk, shivering, haunted by the images in the light, the phantom screams. The next morning, I went back. The light was gone, but the spot where it had been. The ground was scorched, black as pitch, and the ancient oak was withered, its leaves brittle and brown, as if struck by an invisible lightning bolt. And scattered around the base of the tree were dozens of small white pebbles. They looked like teeth, human teeth. That was it. That was the day I put in my resignation. I couldn't do it anymore. The rules, the constant vigilance, the gnawing fear that somewhere, just beyond my sight, something was waiting, watching, hungry. The vanished hikers. They weren't just lost. They weren't just victims of the elements. They were claimed by whatever ancient, unspeakable horror lurks in those shadowed valleys, in those mist-shrouded peaks. I'm out of the woods now, physically. But the woods aren't out of me. I still wake up in a cold sweat, hearing the dry rustling, the rhythmic thumping, the flat, emotionless whispers. I still see the shifting shapes in the light, the skeletal trees, the too perfect flowers. I know what I saw, I know what I heard, and I know what those rules really are. A desperate attempt by a handful of people to keep the rest of us safe from a truth too horrific to comprehend. So if you ever find yourself on the Appalachian Trail, remember this. Remember the rules. Because out there, in the heart of those ancient mountains, some things are better left undisturbed. Some questions are better left unanswered. And some hikers, they don't just get lost. They join the others. And the rules, they hide the truth. They hide the vanished hikers.